All right, today we're going to move on looking at the Mongol Empire. So we looked at how the Mongols conquered their territory. Let's take a look at how they ruled it. You should be able to explain after this lesson about how the Mongols built and ruled their empire, but also describe their impact on China and the wider world. So let's take a look. How did they create one of the largest empires in the history of the world? You can see here, this red represents everything controlled by the Mongols. This is absolutely massive, right? This is Italy. This is Constantinople, right? They're kind of closing in on all sides. At one point, this is a big part of the Islamic Caliphate. So they really do create this massive, massive land-based empire that's really never been topped. So the Mongols originate from the vast Eurasian steppe, that's this grassland area that kind of spreads all the way here from right just north of Korea all the way west to the eastern half of Europe. Right here, it's kind of the Ukrainian area. You can see Constantinople here. This is Russia. Massive empire. And they started as nomadic herders known for their skilled horsemanship and fierce warfare, right? This grass area, it's great for traveling on horseback, and the Mongols become experts on traveling and fighting on horseback. This is going to be key to their success. Now, Genghis Khan united the Mongol Empire and all the clans in 1206 Common Era, as we saw. It created a disciplined army focused on conquest. And the Mongol warriors used this thing called the composite bow that allowed them to shoot arrows at long distances while on horseback. So they had this strong bow, they were fast on horseback, and they used psychological warfare to overwhelm their enemies. Essentially, they were kind of the shock troopers of the ancient world. I mean, look at this guy. He's riding backwards on a horse while shooting a bow and arrow. That's insane. So by the time Genghis Khan dies in 1227 Common Era, he's conquered pretty much all of Central Asia, and his descendants will expand the empire even further, reaching the eastern parts of Europe, as we talked about, reaching what used to be Persia, and going into China itself. Eventually, this giant singular empire will be divided up into what are called four Khanates. There's China, that will become known as the Huan dynasty, Persia, known as the Ilkhanate, then there is Central Asia, called the Chagatai, and then there's Russia, known as the Golden Horde. And so if you're looking at the Silk Road here, right, it is basically completely controlled by the Mongols at this time. And as we keep talking about a common theme in this class, whoever controls trade routes, well, they pretty much control everything. This enters someone else's name who we need to know, Kublai Khan, who completed the Mongol conquest of China and started what we know now as the Huan dynasty. So Kublai Khan was Genghis Khan's grandson, became known as the Great Khan in 1260 Common Era. That's the Khan that ruled over all the other Khans. You can have the word Khan basically meaning king. Now, he focused on conquering all of China. China was really the big prize for them, and this had eluded all the earlier Mongols, including Genghis Khan himself. Now, the Song dynasty kind of retreated down into southern China and lost control of large tracts of the territory before this, but in 1279 Common Era, Kublai Khan was finally able to reunite the southern Song dynasty with the rest of this territory, reuniting China for the first time in 300 years, right? Kind of bringing it into a much larger empire. We now refer to this as the Huan dynasty in China. Kublai Khan founded the Huan dynasty starting from 1279 Common Era, and the Huan dynasty lasted until 368. Now, I'm never going to test you on these years, so don't worry about the exact years. You should know that he was a Mongol emperor, but ruled as an emperor of China. And Kublai Khan is actually remembered as one of China's greatest emperors because he was able to unify the country and promote such stability and prosperity during the Huan dynasty. So let's take a look at how Kublai Khan ruled China and maintained Mongol control during this period. Again, this is the Huan dynasty, which is really the Mongol control of China. So first and foremost, he moved the Mongol capital from the areas of Mongolia to Beijing itself inside the walls of the Great Wall of China. This showed that he intended to rule as a true Chinese emperor and not as a foreign ruler. He even built a lavish palace for himself and embraced a lot of the Chinese court customs, so he adopted some Chinese customs for himself. But he also wasn't content on taking all the wealth of China. Instead, he was ruling it as a true emperor. He improved Chinese infrastructure, restoring and extending that great canal built by previous dynasties, ensuring consistent food shipments and supplies for all of China, built new highways for trade and communication across the empire. He even allowed Chinese officials to serve as local leaders, but kept Mongols and foreigners in the top government roles for the entire empire. So locally, he let the Chinese rule, but when it came to the Grand Empire, he preferred to rely on Mongols and other non-Chinese to rule the greater empire because he didn't really trust them. He also maintained separate Mongol laws for the Mongol people and one the separate set of laws for the Chinese people. Essentially, Mongols lived apart from the Chinese population while ruling over them. Now, Kublai did value Confucian scholars, but distrusted the Chinese nobles because he saw them as a threat to his power. After all, if you study history, you saw the local nobles, left to their own devices, are going to stir up problems for any good emperor. So, why did the Mongols favor foreigners in their administration during this dynasty instead of just relying on the Chinese nobles? Well, let's take a look. So, he did employ many non Chinese advisors and officials. He believed that they would be more loyal to him since they lacked ties to the Chinese provinces. That is, these outsiders owed more to Kublai Khan than they owed to, say, the local Chinese people, so they could be trusted more. So, Muslims, Persians, and even Europeans were brought in and held many government posts across the Chinese Empire. And it's during this time of the Huan Dynasty that the empire really kind of comes into its own as an international trade hub for an exchange of ideas. This is the period that historians refer to as the Pax Mongolica, or the Mongol Peace, right? We call it the Pax Romana, the 200-year period of peace in the Roman Empire that allowed trade and peace to spread, blah, 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 blah. This is the Mongol version of it, but much, much bigger, right? The Mongols do everything bigger. It became safe to have trade routes across all of Asia, which encouraged economic growth and cultural diffusion, meaning the spread of Chinese and Mongol culture. Chinese inventions like printing, gunpowder, and the compass spread along during this time along the Silk Road west, eventually finding their way to Europe. But the Mongols weren't satisfied with just controlling China. They wanted to expand their borders and their control far beyond that. So let's see what happened when the Huan Dynasty tries to go past China. Now, Kublai, the Great Khan himself, attempted to invade the islands of Japan twice, in 1274 and 1281, which we'll be talking more about in our lesson on feudalism in Japan. Both of these invasions failed due to fierce resistance and also typhoons, these massive storms that kind of came out of nowhere, destroying the Mongol fleets. The Japanese called these storms kamikaze, or divine winds, as they believed it was the gods coming to their rescue against the Mongol hordes. These winds will have this unifying effect of the Japanese people, but will also have some effect on destabilizing their government, which we'll get to when we talk about feudalism in Japan in our next lesson. These failed invasions weakened Mongol power and drained their resources, as all conquerors attempts do eventually, right? They expand themselves too far, they drain their resources with constant warfare. In Korea in particular, which was never really controlled by the Mongols, but was more of a vassal state, they suffered heavy losses because they were the ones who provided the ships and supplies for the invasions. That all gets wiped out, so it also destabilizes Korea at this time. It's here we enter the story of a man named Marco Polo, a European who, some say, found his way into Kublai Khan's court and was put into a position of power. So Marco Polo was a European merchant from the city of Venice right here, kind of where the boot of Italy meets the mainland of Europe, and it's said that, or at least he claims, he traveled to China along the Silk Roads with his father and his uncle, arriving in China sometime around the year 1275 Common Era. He recorded these experiences in a book known as The Travels of Marco Polo after he returned to Europe, a book that I actually have a 100-year-old copy of sitting on my desk at home. In this book, he describes China's wealth, the use of coal, paper money, and a postal system, all of which Europeans found too fantastical to believe. So many Europeans actually began to doubt these stories over time, but they did help spark interest in Asian trade and exploration centuries later. Some people point out holes in it, such as there's certain things that he doesn't mention, like Chinese of drinking of tea, which people thought was odd that he didn't mention it if he had been there, since it was such a big part of their culture. But there are reasons he may not have mentioned it, right? It might have just been a big deal to him. Other parts of the story, he talks about seeing fantastical creatures like unicorns, but those might have just been rhinoceroses. So there's some odd stuff in the book of The Travels of Marco Polo, but it does inspire Europeans to start thinking about China and all the wealth that is out there. As you probably predicted, the Mongol rule of the Huan Dynasty doesn't last forever, so something does eventually lead to its decline and fall and its replacement. So again, you're probably not going to be surprised, but let's get to it. So it's in the late Huan Dynasty period, so like the later half of their rule. They saw a lot of problems that Mongols just couldn't overcome. So they had multiple failed military campaigns, trying to expand their territory into Southeast Asia, so further down into Vietnam, draining their resources, corruption with the government, high taxes to pay for these military campaigns. All this built resentment among the Chinese peasants. That led to unrest, which led to them trying to overthrow their government, right? On top of that, there's floods, famine, plague, all worsened in the 1300s, and the heavy spending on wars and the luxurious life of the Khans led to the Chinese people saying, you know what, we don't want this anymore. After all, they didn't learn the lesson that if you're ever in charge of empire, you need to know this. If you want to keep your people from overthrowing you, you have to keep their minds distracted and their bellies full. And the Huan dynasty, like so many different empires before them, didn't learn that lesson, or at least didn't continue to follow that lesson, and they fell victim to peasant uprisings. So rebellions erupt, and in 1368 Common Era, this is known as the Red Turban Rebellion. The rebels overthrew the Huan dynasty and established a new dynasty known as the Ming dynasty, who we're not really going to get into right here in our lessons. We'll circle back to them later. What was the lasting impact of the Mongol Empire? So this is where I want to finish up with. So the Mongols connected Europe and Asia through trade and communication networks, right? Those Silk Roads, the Mansu Marketplace, really kind of expand to their peak at this time. And the cultural diffusion, right? The spread of Chinese art, technology, and knowledge spreads along all these trade routes and have a massive impact on the rest of world history. And the Mongols were known for their religious tolerance. They had their own religious beliefs, but they were very tolerant of other people believing what they wanted to believe. And this allows Buddhism, Islam, Christianity, and Taoism to all coexist within China and flourish during this time period. And finally, despite their decline, the Mongol rule ushered in centuries of global contact and influenced future trade and exploration that will directly lead to Europeans trying to seek out Kublai Khan during the Age of Exploration, which we're going to be getting to in second semester. So there we have it. We've come to an end finally again. I rewrite the goal. Don't copy and paste. Type it out. Write out 3 complete sentences, complete thoughts, things that you learned from these notes. And again, don't copy and paste. The act of writing it out is what's going to help you remember it. And then write one last question you have from here or anything that we've talked about that I can help you with. And again, the act of doing something with this information helps you integrate it into your memory. It's going to help you do better on the test. All right. And then we'll see you in class.